Just want to briefly stop here. As you could see, this is called a tree tobacco, and it has become a tree. Needs to be chopped down urgently. It's a plant that comes from Peru. It is related to nicotina or tobacco, and I'm told that in either the early settlers or the Indians, if they couldn't have tobacco, they would smoke these leaves. How good that was, I don't know, but it is a nicotine plant. Hummingbirds like it because, again, as being a hummingbird, they like tubular flowers with color, either red or yellow, so that they like that. But that's no reason to keep something that is non-native and has a lot of seeds. And the reason that it seems that plants that are non-native seem to be prolific in their seeds. It's one comes with the other, it seems, because you always think, well, if it's just one plant, it's really not so bad. But by virtue of their ability to spread so many seeds, that's why they go to places and then take the nutrients away from plants that are native and should stay there, and so they die off and the non-natives take over. Behind us here, and we might as well talk about it while we're standing here, is what's called a salt bush. Now, in contrast, the salt bush is native, all right? And it's very good, it's food for birds. The birds like the seeds. Again, this whole area is in marine environment bio area because it has to contend with hard winds, cold winds, salt, a lot of salt, poor soil, and so the plants are adapted to this, and unfortunately the non-natives seem to be able to do that too. Excuse me. And the salt bush here is called also a quail bush. Because of the harsh environment, it's relatively short, but they can grow into, these 8-foot huge bushes. And the reason it's called quail bush is because it will give shelter to small animals like quail, which we really don't have on the peninsula anymore. Unfortunately, it's extinct because of a variety of reasons and lack of environment. Wild cats, just ground breeding birds have a tough time, reestablishing themselves because a lot of things are after them. Maybe one day supposedly there is a breeder in Rolling Hills behind the gates that breeds quail. So maybe, but now we have coyotes again. Now the coyotes, everybody heard about the coyotes? Yeah. Initially, when we first heard about that, people tell us, we said, yeah, it's probably a wild dog, or who ever heard of coyotes on the peninsula? And then the reports came more and more, and that from people that knew what a coyote looks like really, and sure enough, so nobody really knows how they got here. They are the original inhabitants, like everywhere else, like Orange County, like St. Gabriel Mountains. The coyotes live there, and the coyotes are very smart animals, and they can live with society, with civilization very well, and there's always enough cat food out and stuff like that they can get, and also there's plenty of rabbits, and they're very adaptable. They eat whatever is handy, and they're very industrious and intelligent, and so they have no problem, and so they actually really are spreading, and people are beginning to complain about their pets being eaten. So not good, but then again, it's like skunks or anything else. There's really not, they're part of the environment, and we kind of, encroached on them. So now we have coyotes. Anyway, we stopped here because, like I said, there aren't that many good-looking plants. This one is certainly very nice looking, and obviously has adapted to the marine environment. And you can see the little fruits here that have, when they're ripe, first they're green like this, and it's called a bladder pot. And when they're dry, they have these seeds inside, the little black, like sweet peas things. They kind of rattle. And it's almost going all year long. Often we find blossoms, we find fruits at the same time, and it's a pretty bush. It's nice and green. It's relatively easy to recognize because the leaves always have these three leaves. Sometimes you go walk around and you say, oh gosh, what was this again? But it's relative, and it has little yellow blossoms, and again, these bladders are very indicative of this particular bush, and they're all over the peninsula. It's a nice native. I'm always happy to see them, and obviously this one seems to be doing fine. So that's okay. Another California native that really only grows in the coastal area. It's called coastal buckwheat, And those of you that have gone on our walks before know that we always point out buckwheats of all kinds. There's the ashy leaf, and there's the California. There's a large variety of buckwheats, but the leaves all look a little different. And this one has these little cute little sort of almost heart-shaped little leaves, stays low, and is really adapted to this harsh marine environment. But on top of that, it is the main food source and breeding ground for the El Segundo blue. Now the El Segundo blue butterflies is small. It's maybe like a fingernail, and it's related to the Palos Verdes blue. And for those of you, watch out if everybody kind of come over a little bit. They're bigger than we are, so we have to make room.
Not if I fall over.
Yeah, don't want you to. And the story of the Palos Verdes blue is really very neat for those of you that might not have. Has everybody heard about the Palos Verdes blue? Then I don't have to tell you about it. Okay, tell you about the Palos Verdes blue. The El Segundo blue is also endangered. Okay, and people around the airport work very diligently to preserve. And that's one of the reasons that there is no more houses. When you fly out of LAX, you can see housing pads and old roads, and that was discontinued because the El Segundo blue butterfly lived there. And there is a group just like ours that sees to it that there's enough host plants and that the El Segundo blue is protected. But that was the only area it ever was. Then some were discovered here, which was big excitement because we have coastal buckwheat here, all right? So then this year, they discovered that actually the El Segundo blue has come around and is now near Point Vicente, which was very exciting news because, you know, these tiny little butterflies, loss of habitat is always threatening and so forth, so that was very exciting. But the best news was that at one time, as recent as the 70s, we did have a Palos Verdes blue, and it's a tiny little blue butterfly. And the last ones that they had thought they saw or that they knew about was at what is now Hess Park, before Hess Park was developed. When they developed Hess Park, they got the blue disappeared. And actually the city of Rancho Palos Verdes was sued for that reason because they destroyed the last butterfly. And you know, once they're gone, and it was a big upset and everybody was very sad. And the scientific community, I mean, most people don't know about it, but the scientific community, you know, every time you lose a species, it's very sad. So then the Navy fuel depot, the Navy has a fuel depot on Gaffey Street. Somebody's coming, and we'll just let him through. And those of you who don't know, they have these fuel tanks that are sunk into the ground. You hardly see them, but it's a military reservation, so you cannot get in. It's fenced off. It says, you know, Navy fuel depot. And basically what they have all the jet fuel for the entire West Coast for the military there to this day. And the military decided there that they needed to inventory their native plants because although at one time, when they graded this and put these tanks in pre-World War II, there was nothing left. I mean, they just grade and they do these things. But in the meantime, the native habitat being undisturbed had come back, which native habitat tends to do. And so they had quite a good area of native habitat on these hills and these tanks and so forth. And so they asked a professor from UCLA to come and inventory their native habitat. So he comes and he inventories, and while he's doing this, he rediscovers the Palos Verdes blue butterfly. Big excitement. So what happened then is, and actually that's how the Land Conservancy's nursery started. They asked the Land Conservancy, would they establish a nursery to raise plants that would be planted there where they would extend the habitat, they would replace perhaps where would be a bare spot or even hills that didn't have habitat in order to give this butterfly lots of food. And so we did that. We established a little nursery, and also the university and this professor established a breeding program for the Palos Verdes blue. So all those were just, really important steps. And then eventually that's how our nursery got started. Now our nursery raises thousands and thousands of plants to plant the preserves that we manage. And it has gotten into a really big operation. We're still at the site. We're still at the fuel depot, luckily. And, it's a really very professional operation. But that's how it started. And what the aim is that eventually they can breed enough of the butterflies to put them in the preserves that we manage. So that would be great. They actually, one time, they had enough pupae to take them to Chandler, which is one of the very first preserves that we actually own as a conservancy, not a city, but as a conservancy, and we said, we had started there. We learned how to restore. We did all these, we're a grassroots organization. We had to learn also. So we all learned how to weed and how to take out castor bean and how to do this, and then we planted it, and then we let go of these butterflies. But they didn't really take. They released 300, and next year there was only maybe 7 or so, even though the host plants were there, and it went sort of downhill. Watch out, somebody's walking behind you. But we're not going to give up. We, some of the plants have died as things go along, and we're going to replant and restock, and we're going to reintroduce this butterfly again, and we will do so. We're looking forward to doing that at White Point, maybe one day at Portuguese Bend, and so we're busily trying to increase the stock of these butterflies, and that's just one of the jobs that the Conservancy does. So here we go. Right, we stopped here because there's a lot to talk about, and you probably get tired of me talking, but I'm going to try to tell you as much as we know. So what you see here is a lemonade berry bush. Now this is a very prominent bush all over the peninsula, and as you can see when you look here, that's all lemonade berry bush. And in Portuguese Bend there's also a lot. They will just cover the hillsides to stay nice and green, give shelters to animals, burn somewhat less than some other stuff. And being green like this, if you had a hill that needed to be held up and so forth, this is actually a pretty good plant to have if you have the room, obviously. I mean, obviously you can see it gets big. It has, when you go on our walks, it has in the summer, has little fruits on them that come in clustered and sort of look furry. And they have a covering on them that's very tart. It's like lemon, and that's why it's called lemonade berry bush. And the native Indians, as you well know from everywhere else, the native people everywhere use everything that's at their disposal. Roots, seeds, besides perhaps hunting and so forth, but they will utilize everything. For roots for soap, seeds for perhaps some sort of meal or mush that they can cook, acorns for food, for everything. And they made a refreshing tea out of these berries. Right now this one doesn't have any because of the environment. There are still old parts here where later on little pink flowers will come, and perhaps other parts of the peninsula. Sometimes you actually find still either fresh little buds on them or little old fruits or so, but this one is totally denuded. What's sticking out here in between, and we've seen as we go along, is a freshly sprouted California bush sunflowers, and you know those. Later in the spring after the rains, like in February and March, the yellow sunflowers will be all over the hill and look very cheerful and wonderful. And it's a great plant. It can be dormant and look terribly dead, like I showed you before, and then come out and just bloom beautifully later on. And somebody coming through, let them go through. But one of the reasons that we also stopped here because of the view, and it gives you a view about this area. And one of the things that we're seeing very prominently before we talk about history is that those hills up there came down. There were people up there that had their houses. You still see some. One of them slid down altogether. The rest is still there. They now belong to the city of Palos Verdes Estates. They had to buy it off the owners and pay the owners off to the tune of, I believe, $10 million because the owners could prove in court that the drainage system was poor and that the soil got so wet that their houses began to crack up and slip. Only one really, actually fell down, had to be dismantled because it's, in danger of falling down. The rest is there, and they have city employees living there. But really, one of the big historic events that happened here when the peninsula, of course, originally, was bought by the Vanderlip family, there was no road. There was no Palos Verdes Drive. This was it. I mean, it stopped here. So it was decided that they wanted to eventually, part of the development of the peninsula at that time in the early 20s was to have a road go all the way around the peninsula. And so in 1920, between 1923 and 1926, when first they started in 1923, they dynamited, blasted the cliff out. And this is one of the highest cliffs on the peninsula. When you drive around, we have beach steps all over the peninsula. If you look on a certain, like if you look from Portuguese or from forestal preserves, you can see that the peninsula goes sort of in gentle steps. Those are all former beaches. As the rocks, the peninsula was lifting slowly, you know, think big, millions of years, you know, slowly lifting out of the ocean. Every time there's a step, that was a beach that used to be down here. So in a few million years, this one down here may be up here. And, you know, have to think big, you know, big numbers. And